Polygon did about 80 billion in stablecoin volume in May. We had the highest amount of volume and the highest number of transactions of all the chains. So we exceeded Solana, we exceeded BNB. The number of transactions being committed by agents on chain and in the payment space in general will exceed that of humans in 5 years. And those systems are going to need high-speed settlement networks.
Hello everybody, we're here for day 3 of ETHConf and I am joined by John Egan, the Chief Product Officer at Polygon. In such a competitive space, how does Polygon win out against the other chains that are fighting for a similar space?
So first and foremost, if you look at the last month or two, and especially in May, I think Polygon did about 80 billion in stablecoin volume in May. And we had the highest amount of volume and the highest number of transactions of all the chains. So we exceeded Solana, we exceeded BNB, and we also have the fastest growth curve. So when you think about this kind of through the lens of transaction volume, which you always have to cut down a little bit, right? How much of that is wash trading across other chains? How much of it is real? Visa does a surprisingly good job in some of their analytics, actually, of the rollups. And so I would challenge your point a little bit, which is that I actually think Polygon is breaking into the lead, if it's not already there, and is only increasing. And the stat I gave earlier in terms of our penetration into places like Latin America, which is where the use case is very real. Right? No one in Latin America, in Brazil, is using stable coins, for wash trading. Right? It's there because it's a useful currency that helps people in their daily lives. And when we sort of track metrics internally, that's what we pay attention to. We pay attention to are stable coins on Polygon being used for true utility? Right? Are people getting actual value out of it? And we sort of ignore the rest of the market, right? Because you can kind of produce these numbers in any other way.
Now, Polygon has evolved an enormous amount, and you recently sunsetted zkEVM, and now the focus is on fintech, infrastructure and payments. Why is it the right move? Why is this where Polygon has ended up? And how do we know that this will stick and that you won't evolve elsewhere?
So I think first and foremost, Polygon has been a technology company, under the hood, which is how are you building these basic rails for moving information that captures money, right, and information that captures these contracts, right, for smart money around. And how that fits into the market shifts with the market. Right. And you would expect it to, right? How did we think about the internet, when it first came out versus how do we think about the internet today? Yeah. When the internet first came out, we barely had email, right? And in fact, sending an email was less efficient than walking next door and talking to your neighbor. And that evolved, and now we have commerce, right? You could argue commerce is one of the biggest and most interesting uses of the internet up until pretty recently when it started changing towards agentic. Crypto is no different, and blockchain is no different. And maybe it's not surprising, right, that it turned out the killer use case for crypto is money. And so I think, good companies, their positioning in the market evolves with the market around them. Right? We don't want to become a dinosaur. We want to keep up. And we also want to be as useful to our users and the operators on chain as possible. And so our focus has changed a little bit over time, and our mission has changed. Right? So for a long time, we were trying to build up the trustless internet because that is what was missing, in a world where Ethereum hadn't scaled yet, and you needed a scaling layer that anyone could use and could be trustless and distributed. That was the most important thing for us to be doing. Now that we've built that, the mission has to evolve. And our mission now is to move all money on chain, right? Which is I would argue, a much longer term vision for the organization, because we're not just moving some of it, and we're not just moving it exclusively onto the Polygon chain. We are moving all money on chain. Once the money is on chain, the whole of humanity will be incredibly well served. And so I would like to think this is a terminal mission for the company. I think this is something that will carry us forward for an awfully long time and will lift the world with us. And I think I consider it a kind of a success case, a champagne problem that we get to evolve. For what it's worth, what NFTs were as a technology hasn't gone away. Sort of the capture, right, of ownership is still present. Maybe we're not trading gifts around like we were at one point. But I think money and the transfer of value today is the most interesting and capable use chain of blockchain. And the payments market, which is so large and fragmented, there's a really unique opportunity to take this industry and simplify it. And so when you look at how we're addressing the mission today, which is our vision, which is creating the open money stack, it's very directly related, right? If we create this stack, if we create this single entry point to all things money, then we will further our progress towards that mission, and we will further the world's access and ability to lever really the underlying value of what money is supposed to be. Right? Money should be productive, money should be useful, money should be easily accessible, money should be global. All these things have to be true. And it's an extension of kind of this base blockchain layer technology all the way up through the stack of payments networks and financial services and actual UX and front ends that will give us the ability to kind of realize the first part, of this very long-term mission. So I think, how do we really get in and become the dominant chain? Number one, I'd argue we already are. But number two, we stay there by doing the things that people want, not just doing the things that we think make us look good. So we make deep and continuing investments into cross-border money movement, right? Clear opportunity for stablecoins over traditional fiat. We invest really deeply in having liquidity globally in countries that really need the dollar. Right now, 99% of stablecoins are dollar stablecoins, and we make sure that Polygon has deep liquidity. And if you don't have deep liquidity in these countries, you won't get that transaction volume happening from the ramp standpoint, so in and out, which happens really at the exchange level. And then finally, we invest really heavily in non-USD stablecoins, which I feel like is just this overlooked space, right? Today, if you're in another country and you're ramping down out of dollars, you're sort of mixing your FX with the ramp. Right? You're saying, great, you're my ramp provider, you're also going to give me my FX kind of spot price, which is very bank-like, right? That's kind of what you do when you go to a bank. You say, hey, I've got dollars, give me a spot price, and there's some kind of sketchy stuff happening there with like margin and spread, right? But eventually that's all going to move on-chain. Eventually we're going to have on-chain FX, and that's what a really healthy global stablecoin market's going to look like. Polygon is 75%. Or more, actually, I think now, of non-USD stablecoins. All of that global innovation happening outside of the USD stablecoin is happening on Polygon already. So that's how we innovate.
USDT and USDC make up basically the entire stablecoin market. Do you think that duopoly holds for much longer?
I think it's tough to predict that future. I think both outcomes are possible. I can see a world where a preference towards the dollar continues to increase. And I think certainly in countries with unstable currencies, that won't change anytime soon. I think it's silly to ignore other kind of first tier type global currencies. The euro comes to mind, the yen comes to mind. Like, these currencies aren't going to disappear anytime soon. And even if your pathway to the dollar is from those currencies, you're going to want to get on chain in an equivalent currency first. If for no other reason, then you'll want access to a decentralized FX market to come in and out. So in an ideal world, you as an operator, as a treasurer, say at a multinational, should be able to easily swap in and out of any of these currencies without having to come off chain, right? And so I get to play a little bit of this position of, it doesn't really matter which direction it goes. What's important to me is that there's deep liquidity and utility on Polygon for each of them.
I saw we announced it on our X just an hour ago, which is some news with Mastercard. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Right, so Mastercard just announced an agent payment protocol, which is really exciting, which makes it easier for anyone using this protocol to make payments or otherwise and involve the Mastercard network, and Polygon as a participant in this. We're really excited about that. Mastercard specifically, we're excited about a couple of different areas. Agent payments, which I think are an emerging space right now, and then also direct settlement onto stablecoins, which is really breaking down this barrier of, if you're a merchant and you're trying to receive settlement from a payment that you've received, being able to do that after hours, being able to do it over the weekend, being able to do it on holidays. If you're a thin margin business, which is the vast majority of businesses, that's extremely important as well. And so those two things kind of come together, right? So agents paying each other, settlement happening more instantly, and access to this kind of network that Mastercard has created globally that merchants have already adopted sort of starts to come together to produce all of the advantages of the payments capabilities of a chain like Polygon, accessed through a system people are familiar with, which is a place that I go and tap my card and another brand that I trust in Mastercard. So we're really excited about that partnership. We're excited to be part of it, and we expect to continue to go deeper with them and Visa and basically all of the credit card networks over time.
But last question for you on this. There's an enormous amount of talk about AI agents and machine economy and where that goes. Now, right now, the transaction volume is modest. Some of the numbers being thrown around about what size of opportunity this is enormous, like even as near as 2030. How big an opportunity really is this?
I think it's fair to say that the number of transactions being committed by agents on chain and in the payment space in general will exceed that of humans in 5 years, like at least, maybe faster. Simply because of the speed at which something can get to scale once exposed effectively to the agent economy. Remember, we've only just crossed the barrier from sort of these local chat agents, right, to actually deployable agents. OpenClaw was kind of the beginning of this, right? These kind of autonomous agents you might have at home. You might remember the Mac Minis, right, sold out everywhere because everyone started running OpenClaw. Locally, we're going to see a proliferation of that. Maybe it won't be OpenClaw running on Mac Minis, but certainly from the largest AI creation companies, we're going to see more autonomous agents operating. And what's cool about those agents they're replicable, right? Right now, we think about it in terms of my agent, right? But more and more what we're seeing is agents creating sub-agents, and those sub-agents creating sub-agents, and those sub-agents wanting to talk to other sub-agents. And there's going to be a commerce layer between everyone's agents that want to interact with each other. And they're going to be middlemen, and they're going to be brokers, and they're going to be programs. And today, all of this is handled by a series of middleware systems, right, with one UX front end that humans interact with. So a good example of this is I make a payment at Shopify. That gets processed by Stripe. In the back end, there are all these routing systems determining best routing and fastest way to deliver, and then settlement systems, all of that, right, over time will be picked up by AI agents that work towards maximum efficiency and routing. And so as that happens, I expect the transaction volume to skyrocket. And those systems are going to need high-speed settlement networks. They can't just be credit networks, right? Because when I make an exchange with you as an agent, we need it to be done. It can't be reversible, because I'm going to turn around as a middleware agent and go and take another action with that money I was paid. So settlement becomes incredibly important. And you can see this starting to take hold. But once high-speed settlement and swarms of agents are interacting, billions of transactions, right? So, when we look at what we're doing on the chain level with Polygon in terms of transactions per second, right? We're crossing about 5,000 right now. We have a pathway towards 100,000 gigagas, that we've already achieved internally. Credit card networks really only do about, 5 to 10,000 today. So we're almost there. And we're going to exceed that in 10x it. And it's necessary capacity. I think sometimes people think, that capacity at some point we're just getting silly, right? But that is necessary capacity for the scale of transactions agents will execute.
John, this was a fascinating conversation. You've got to go on stage soon, so I will wrap it here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for joining us.